Welcome back from lunch. I'm glad to see you all here. I'm Rebecca Nedostup. I teach modern Chinese history here at Brown, and I'm really delighted to be part of the proceedings. I just want to also extend a word of gratitude to Li Juqing and Joe Mizell and all the wonderful students who have, and library staff who've worked so hard over the years to make the digital project possible and a success, and then also to bring these group of eminent scholars together for this symposium. So I am going to introduce both of our speakers for this first afternoon panel together, and then they will give their presentations and I will make a few remarks. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So first we will have a presentation from Dr. Hongxing Zhang, who is the Senior Curator of East Asia at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where he has curated several headline exhibitions on Chinese and Asian art. And I want to commend to you one of his major projects, which is he's been carrying out from 2016 onward, along with the research team, which is the Chinese Iconography Thesaurus, CIT, which is a classification scheme with a complementary image archive for Chinese visual culture. And that is a wonderful resource that has both been published by Brill, but then also has some web presence as well. And he will be presenting a paper, The Early Photographic Reproduction of the Battle Paintings by Qingkuan et al., the question of its date, photographer, and use. Our second presenter is Daniel M. Greenberg, Assistant Professor and Director of Undergraduate Studies, an important role, in art history at University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Professor Greenberg is author of a book manuscript, Landscape of Empire, which examines the relationship between Jesuit painting, state ritual, and foreign relations at the 18th century Chinese court. He's also deeply interested in the relationship between natural history and the Qing court, and how the Qing Empire was supported by the collection, documentation, and consumption of exotic animals and plants. I'm very glad to be able to welcome them both here to Brown. So I will turn over the podium to Dr. Zhang.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Thank you, Professor Nedostup, for the very kind introduction, and thanks Zhujing Li for inviting me to not only to this very meaningful event, but also really encouraging me to research on the bronze the photographs we are going to talk about. And also thanks digital colleagues in Brown for making my participation possible. The early photographic reproduction of the battle paintings in Brown has the title 钦定校评七省方略图说, or the imperially commissioned history of the military campaigns in the 7th province in illustration. I want to make it clear at the outset, the subject of this paper is not Brown's copy per se, but the corpus of all the copies of the photographs of the paintings as a whole, or the photo set as I will call it. The Brown's copy is part of this. In the following, I shall try to ask 3 basic questions. When was the photo set made? Who was the photographer? And how were the photographs intended to be used? Before diving into these specific questions, it's necessary to have an overview of the copies of the photo set I know exist. The paintings from which the photographs are derived, and above all, the commissions that result in the paintings. To my knowledge, apart from Brown, 3 other institutions also have acquired 1 or more copies of part or the whole photo set. This slide is a snapshot of the copies in the 4 collections. From left to right, it's Brown, Peking University Library, Palace Museum in Beijing, and Toyobunko in Tokyo. It's worth noting a variation in formats among the copies of this photo set in these institutions. For both Brown and Toyobunko, the individual photographs are mounted on loose cards, while the photos in Peking University are mounted into photo album. The Palace Museum has multiple copies, and they are either in card mounted like in Brown's or in albums. This graph shows that both Toyobunko and the Palace
Excuse me,
Museum—
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Zhang. We can't see your slides. Could you share them?
You can't see
No.
slides. Oh dear. Right. I'm terribly sorry. Let me go back.
I think you might have a message in the chat from our media services.
Okay, are you not sharing a screen? Sorry. Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm terribly sorry that, is that all right now? It's the first, yeah, the first slide.
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Great. So this is the slides are showing the copies in 4 collections, and I just quickly go through this. This graph, and we can see that both Toyobunko and the Palace Museum Beijing sets are complete, i.e. 20 images of the Taiping subset, 18 of the Nian, and 35 of the Hui or Muslim. While the Beijing University Library doesn't have the Hui subset altogether, number 4 of the Nian subset is missing from Brown's copy. For art historians today, these photographs are extremely valuable research material for the study of the paintings. Firstly, the photo set function as illustrated catalog, enable us to identify subject matter for the paintings, which from time to time emerge from public or private collections. For example, the subject matter of this painting now in McTaggart collection in University of Alberta Museum can be speedily identified as the Battle of Xuzhou in North Jiangsu in the campaign against the Nian, thanks to the existence of the photograph number 6 in the Nian subset. Secondly, the photo set provides invaluable information on the history of the commission of the paintings. The 4 extra handwritten cards in the set tells a great deal about the genesis of the paintings, the subject matters of the paintings, and artists who were recruited to produce these paintings. To my knowledge, nowhere else in contemporary sources has a complete list of the artists and the subject matters of Nian and Hui subsets. Cooperating with relevant contemporary sources, we learned that this commission was large-scale and complex. It involved many personalities of the time, ranging from Empress Dowager Cixi, Prince Chen Yihuan, through high officials and clerks in the central government, and officials in province, to the court artists in Beijing and the non-court artists in other places. In the course of the commission, the artists produced not only final paintings, but also preliminary studies, full-scale cartoons, and prints. This diagram is my reconstruction of the process of the commission. Briefly speaking, in spring 1885, Cixi initiated the concept. Yi Huan was the chief commissioner. Later in that year, the prince led clerks in Junjicu to produce the project brief. The commission was officially launched in spring 1886. Qingkuan led a team of painters in the court to set up the painting studio in a temple outside the forbidden city to work on the paintings. The process of commissioning the Taiping subgroup was more complicated than the other two subsets. Initially, the prince asked Li Hongzhang, the governor of Zhili based in Tianjin, to submit a study of 15 battles fought by Hunan and the Huai armies. Subsequently, Li Hongzhang asked Zheng Guoquan, Zheng Guofan's younger brother and the governor general in Liangjiang based in Nanjing, to produce a painting depicting the battles that Hunan army had fought. Zheng Guoquan then recruited Wu Youru, the leading news illustrator for Dianshidai Huabao in Shanghai, for this task. In the early summer of that year, Wu Youru and his assistants traveled from Shanghai to Nanjing for the commission, and they completed at the end of 1886. So in 1887, Zheng Guoquan was able to submit Wu Youru's study to the court through Li Hongzhang. The story did not end here. After he returned to Shanghai, Wu Youru had his drawings of the studies published as a loose lithographic prints inserted in the Dianshidai Huabao. The entire commission was complete in 1892. Having had some knowledge of the commission as a whole, we can turn to the question of the date of the photographs. We are aware that 1886 was the year when the painters began to work on the commission. I also mentioned the painting project was completed in 1892, whereas the evidence on the right part of the screen are the two pieces of information from the Qing court sources. One is the copy of Qingkuan's official CV kept in Junjicu archives. Another is the entry in Qingshi. These two documents indicate in 1891, the commission was near the end. 1892 was the year when the commission finally finished. On the left half of the screen, we are looking at the paragraphs extracted from the personal notes in Taiping Ge Biji by Di Zuqing and was published in 1922. Di Zuqing was a Juren degree scholar and was associated with the failed political reforms of 1898, headed by the Guangxu Emperor. In these two paragraphs, Di recorded in the winter of 1900, in the aftermath of Boxer Rebellion, he traveled from Japan back to China, stayed in the capital, and witnessed the loss of the imperial collections from the palaces. He wrote, through his Japanese contacts, he visited the Sea Palace, the Three Palace, all called, saw the pitiful scenes of the Ziguangge interior. Given 1892 was the completion date of the commission and 1900 was the date when many paintings in Ziguangge dispersed, it's logical to conclude the photographer would only have taken those photographs at some point between 1892 and 1900. Is it possible to further narrow down the date of the photographs? If the photographs were made under Qingkuan's supervision, which is possible, it follows that it could only have been done between 1892 and 1894, because in 1894, Qingkuan experienced a devastating personal misfortune. During that year, when he was just enjoying his newly appointed position as the vice director of the Silver Vault, or the Treasury in the Imperial Household Department, he was impeached by a censor for corruption. The subsequent investigation did not yield any substantial evidence to support the charge. Nevertheless, the investigator discovered along the way, he actually had been born into a civilian Han Chinese family surname Zhao. At some point of his youth, he was falsely registered as a bondservant in the upper three banners and acquired a Manchu named Qingkuan, which paved the way for his entering the service in the Imperial Household Department. The Qing law served a harsh punishment for asserting false bannerman status. Qingkuan was expelled from his office and the banners. His home was searched and his property confiscated. A contemporary court official who witnessed the seizure described it as a real-life enactment of the one inflicted on the protagonist family described in the classic mid-18th century novel Hong Lou Meng by Cao Xueqing. If we can't give a more precise date to the photo set, we are even further away from attributing it to a particular photographer. However, two individuals merit special attention in future pursuit of this question. One is Prince Chen Yihuan, the commissioner of the painting project. Yihuan, among the royal family members, had the longest and the strongest interest in photography. The group portrait on the right was taken by an anonymous photographer in 1863. In the picture, the prince stands in the center, flanked by his two bodyguards. The text above is a poem written by himself. According to the Palace Museum in Beijing, where this photograph is held, it's probably the earliest photograph taken in the court, and it was the 40 years before Cixi's employment of Xunling as her official photographer in 1903. Another person merits special attention in this regard is Liang Shitai, a professional photographer. Liang established his studio in Hong Kong in early 1870s, then moved to Shanghai, finally to Tianjin in late 1870s. The photograph on the left is a portrait of the General Grant and Li Hongzhang in Li's official residence in Tianjin. It was taken by Liang Shitai in 1879. It was probably through Li Hongzhang Liang Shitai was introduced to the Prince Chen Yihuan. In the 1880s, the prince hired Liang Shitai to produce many photographs on various occasions. The first assignment Liang Shitai received from the prince was 1886, when the prince made an official inspection tour to the new navy and coastal defenses in Tianjin, Lushun, Dagu, and Weihaiwei. Liang Shitai was hired as an official photographer for the tour. When concluding the inspection, the prince presented Cixi with a photographic album produced by Liang Shitai, and it features portraits of the prince, court, and local officials, navy officers, as well as his entourage, including Qingkuan and Jing Lujian, shown on the right of the screen, two leading artists in the battle painting commission. Qingkuan and Jing Lujian were ordered to document the inspection too, but with a brush. The two pieces shown on the left are the part of the paintings, and they made featuring the naval exercise during the tour. These paintings were also part of the report the prince submitted to Cixi. Given that Liang Shitai had worked for Yihuan and was known to Qingkuan in the 1880s, it seems reasonable to infer he was likely the photographer of the battle paintings. Of course, this attribution is only plausible if the following conditions are met. That is, Liang Shitai was still active in the 1890s, and he still had access to the imperial court. As mentioned earlier, Qingkuan was disgraced in 1894. Whether or not Liang Shitai was the photographer, for anyone at the time documenting this large body of paintings with a camera must have been both exciting and challenging. In the context of the history of photography and the history of art reproduction in China, to my knowledge, it probably was for the first time a photographic reproduction of Chinese paintings was ever made inside China. It was technically challenging because each of the 17 paintings was originally an oversized horizontal scroll. Judging by 12 paintings of the Hui subgroup in the collection of the Palace Museum, Beijing, we learn that each scroll consists of a painting itself measuring about 1.5 meters high and 3 meters long, and the text transcribing an imperial decree of the similar size. To take a picture of each painting, the photographer had to position each scroll of this size on a flat surface parallel to the lens of camera, and set up the evenly distributed light. We can imagine the whole operation must have involved a series of important logistic decisions and the use of some special devices. Given the operational complexity, one wonders why the court wanted to make such an effort to photograph the paintings. This brings us to the final question of my paper here: how the photographs were intended to be used. At the beginning of the paper, we discussed that the photographs are invaluable for today's art historians, as they are a faithful record of how paintings appeared at the time they were newly completed. However, I do not think the original purpose of making this a photo set was for art historical documentation. Was the photo set intended to be companion volume for the Fanglue, or the official history of the military campaigns, as the title inscribed on the bookcase of the bronze copy indicates? I'm two minds or doubted, because the Qingding Jiaoping Qishen Fanglue Tu Shuo is problematic for several reasons. Firstly, as we know, the paintings were completed in 1892, whereas two of the Qishen Fanglue were not published until 4 years later in 1896. It would be anachronistic to call the paintings an illustration of the Fanglue series. Secondly, except for Brown, none of the other copies of this photo set use the title. Besides, the history of the phrase Qishen Fanglue in the title can be traced back to the year 1968 series, when the Chengwen Shuju in Taiwan published the Fanglue series with the title Qingding Pingding Qishen Fanglue. But I have not been able to ascertain whether the Qishen Fanglue is the terminology used in the Qing court or it's coined in the post-Qing era. In an article on the Painting Commission published about more than 20 years ago, I speculate the photo set was intended to be given as a gift to royal family members and the higher officials. And then here I try to elaborate on why I thought and still think it could well be the case. The basis of my speculation is the context in which the paintings from the commission were used at the court. As mentioned earlier, they were made for Ziguangge, a building in the Sea Palace or Shanghai, adjacent to Forbidden City, shown at the up left of this slide. And at the very beginning of the painting commission, Li Hongzhang made it clear in his letter to Zheng Guoquan, Cixi decided the Ziguangge as the home of the paintings. Why Ziguangge? This building had been a site since the Qianlong reign, where the Qing emperors store and display the paintings depicting their wars in the empire during their respective reigns. Therefore, adding paintings depicting the most recent military campaigns to the existing collection is to act in accordance with the dynastic traditions of war commemoration. Following this tradition was important for Cixi, as such adherence to it would secure her favorite place in the history of the dynasty. This was also urgent for her. In 1885, the young Guangxu emperor was fast approaching the age of reigning the government on his own. And as a regent, Zhi was preparing for retirement. A unique feature of this war commemorative tradition is during the Qianlong period, the battle scenes were not only produced as a unique set of paintings, but also reproduced as multiple copies. Typically, the paintings were reproduced in prints, especially copper engravings, a standard technique of reproduction introduced to China by Jesuit missionary artists served at the court. The image at the upper right of the screen shows a detail of a surviving fragment of a large-size painting depicting a battle in the Qianlong campaign in Xinjiang. And the same subject matter and a similar composition were reproduced as a number 8 of 16 copper engravings, shown at the lower right. It is well known among sinologists since Paul Pelliot. Making the 16 copper engravings itself was a complex project in which Qianlong firstly ordered a group of his missionary artists to prepare a set of drawings and then sent the drawings through Guangzhou customs to King Louis XV's court in Paris to have hundreds of the copies of the engravings produced and then ship them back to Beijing. In the Qing court archives, scholars have discovered 5 lists detailing the recipients of the copies of the engravings. Showing at the lower left corner of the screen is a snapshot of the first list. It seems clear the purpose of distributing the images among members of the imperial family, high officials, and also imperial libraries in the capital and the provinces was to propagate throughout the country the glory of the Qianlong's military campaign in the far northwest. Given that the Cixi's commission consciously followed the war commemorative tradition created by Qianlong a century ago, the decision to produce photographs of the battle paintings could well be seen as an integral part of the effort on the part of the Cixi's court to emulate that tradition. Like Qianlong's engravings, these photographs were made to project an image of a strong dynasty onto its subject. The only difference was the Cixi's court used a new reproductive technology of the century, photography, instead of traditional method of printmaking. Put in a comparative perspective, this shift from printmaking to photography in Cixi's court sees the parallel in 19th century Europe. Recent studies by specialists of Western art, such as Stephen Bann, suggest in Europe during the late 19th century, there was a fierce competition between traditional printmaking practice and the photography for reproduction of artworks. By the end of the century, reproductive photography had attained such a high level of quality, the traditional engraving or etching could not compete. Where future research provides sufficient evidence to support my argument about the originally intended use of these photographs, should that be the case, these photographs would be a unique example in the general history of photographic art reproduction. They show that, unlike contemporary European counterpart, photography of the artworks in the late 19th century Qing court had little to do with the development of the history of art as a discipline and its institutions such as museums and illustrated catalogs, but it was used as an overt political tool to promote the image of the dynasty. In this paper, I have attempted to interrogate the photographic reproduction of Qingkuan's battle paintings in bronze and other collections by asking 3 basic questions. When was the photo set made? Who made it? Why was it made? In order to search for answers, I have tried to situate the photo set in the context of the painting project it was associated with. I argued that the photo set was likely produced at some point between 1892 and 1900. I also argue the photo set possibly was intended to be given as a gift to dignitaries and high officials so as to demonstrate the strength of the dynasty despite having gone through unprecedented crisis at the time. The distribution of the photo set can also be seen as a celebration of the Cixi Regency for a quarter century. Identity of the photographer is still a mystery, although I have submitted Liang Shitai as a possible candidate. In the course of preparing for this paper, I was aware not only are my arguments presented here speculative and require further evidence, but also might future investigations bring surprises that may or may not tally with the arguments. For instance, when I have just written up the paper and was filing away images for this research, incidentally, I compared the photographs of text of number 21 in Hui subset at the top and with the image of the original text on paintings that have survived today at the bottom. To my great surprise, the calligraphy in the photographs and the painting is not identical. Looking at the shapes of the same strokes and the structure of the same characters, and above all, the spacing of the text, obviously, they are two pieces written by two calligraphers in two different calligraphy styles. This means the photographer did not take the picture from the text on the paintings, but from another copy of the text. How would this finding further complicate the questions such as the production date of the photo set? I do not know yet. Maybe we will have an answer at another gathering at Brown in the future. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. Professor Greenberg, why don't we keep on moving? I think we're running well behind schedule at this point, so we'll move expeditiously.
Okay. While we're setting up, so as not to waste any time, I'd like to thank Brown for inviting me here, Professor Nedostup for the really lovely introduction, which makes me sound really great. I would love to support my own research, if only it was that concise and well conceived. And also a special thanks to Zhu Li for having us here. And I really appreciate her support during this project, which I'm very excited to work on. And I've timed it just perfectly, so I'm going to jump right in. I'm so happy to have a chance to build upon what Dr. Zhang just presented. He's done a lot of the heavy lifting here regarding the source of the battle prints in the Brown University collection, its likely authorship, and its context within a broader tradition of representing battles at the Qing court. What I'm going to focus on today is a subset of this, which Dr. Zhang has brought up. The fact that, and he said it, this is a classic party trick. You never say regarding Chinese art that it's the first time that anything is done, because somebody will Google it and then find that it happened in the Tang. You never do that. But since he said that this is the first time a photograph of paintings was made in China, I am just happy to repeat his claim. If someone Googles the gotcha, then you're welcome to direct it at Dr. Zhang. But in any case, this is the question that inspired me to think about these photographs of paintings. This is new. This is very interesting. And in the course of today's presentation, I'll show that this is something that is unique to China, as far as I can tell. And it shows photographs being used in a different way than the way they were used in the West. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you an incredibly quick introduction to what we already know. This is a map of the 18th century Dzungar Wars showing Qianlong's campaign out in 1755, his conquering of the Dzungars, which he wanted to memorialize in a series of battle paintings. This memorial site, as we've spoken about today, is at the Ziguangge. I've taken this from, oh, drat. You can't see the bottom. You've taken this from Google Maps, which is amazing. Google Maps is great because anyone can rate any location on Earth. And so this, the Ziguangge gets a 3.7 rating. And the one that you can't see on the bottom is it gets 1 star, and the Chinese says, 不好. But that's the whole of 1 star, 不好. But the important thing to know is that this is part of a site that's still off limits. In fact, it's so off limits that Google Maps doesn't actually know where it is. It's actually up there. This is a forbidden site. You can't get there. You cannot go in. You can't see it. And I'm surprised that Dr. Zhang was managed to get such a clear shot of the building. You can't really do that. The only shots you can get are with Elon Musk or John Kerry was there. So in any case, here's an old photograph that Professor Perdue used earlier, taken around 1879. There were 2 floors of the Ziguangge. The bottom floor was used for these battle paintings. The upper floor was also used to showcase a complementary series of paintings, some of which were battle paintings, others were not. There were also portraits of meritorious officers, as Dr. Zhang mentioned. Oh, here's a print of the site in use. This is part of the suite of prints that Brown has a copy of in the library next door. It shows the Qianlong Emperor being carried in on a palanquin where the Dzungars are waiting to submit in the formalized koto ceremony. The official yurt of state is in front of the Ziguangge, and the Ziguangge is behind it. Now, this would have been part of a painted program, which we've already seen this. This is one of the 2 remaining fragments of the actual original painted series, and then the painting was translated into a series of prints. I'm so happy that Dr. Zhang did all this work, so this is all a review for you, as I say to my students. You can see that the original painting has been sort of translated. Elements of it have been cleaned up, they've been compressed, the number of people isn't exactly the same, the location of those horses isn't exactly the same. It's very much an attempt to take an original from a wall, a very large painting, and turn it into something else, another kind of original, a print. This was the tradition from the time when Qianlong established the precedent well into the 19th century. And further paintings, battle paintings, were translated into prints. So here we have the triumphant return of the conquest of Taiwan. Here we have the Second East Turkestan campaign. Again, we see changing times, changing styles of engraving, but nevertheless the same pattern. But then, all of a sudden, when we get to the photographs at the center of our discussion today, we don't have prints. We have photographs instead. So this is a huge question. Why the shift in media? And can we say anything about the reason why Cixi and the court decided not to commission a series of prints to translate the paintings into another medium, but instead took photographs to do something else, maybe? And with this in mind, I'd like to try to create a broader context for what's happening. The first section of this paper is entitled Original Copies, Prints as Visual Translations. I keep using the word translation because I'm appealing to a European tradition of taking paintings of all sorts and using the medium of copperplate engraving to take that painting and create not a copy, but a second original that has a relationship to that original. This painting is a copy after George Philip Rugendas. And I've included this because the Qianlong Emperor supposedly saw a print of a painting by Rugendas, and this inspired him to commission his own battle paintings and battle painting prints. So this is the European source we hear from the Jesuit sources that inspired Qianlong to adopt this mode of artistic representation. This is a complex and a very interesting story, but the nuance regarding the adoption of this foreign mode of representation and what that meant for the emperor, that's something we can discuss later. But what I want to establish here is that Qianlong's use of this European tradition it was part of what was a long tradition already in the West. Here is the interior of the Stanza della Signora from the private apartments of the Pope in the Vatican. These are paintings that were created by Raphael. And famously, these paintings were translated into the medium of these beautiful prints by an artist named Giorgio Ghisi. And Ghisi writes in his, I don't know, let's just make a line. In any case, right there on the lower left side, where in the original painting there was a door, right? Ghisi has instead, in the place where the door would have been, added an inscription that talks about how he fetched, he made this. And his identity as a maker, not as a copyist, is supported by the fact that these prints were a specialized skill in 16th century Italy. Raphael could not make a copperplate engraving. He couldn't do it. He didn't have the skill. He was a painter. But Ghisi had the skill with a burin to make these copperplate engravings. So the engraver worked with the painter together to translate that painting into another medium. So what we're left with is a second work that has an indexical relationship to the painted original, the painting that came first. The copy points back to the painting, but it's not a copy per se. It has its own originality. The painting has been translated across media into something new. This idea is the same kind of idea as we see here in these original prints that were executed, we remember, in France. So the Qianlong Emperor sent drafts out. The drafts were copied from the painting. The drafts were sent overseas and executed in France. So there is a relationship between print and painting that very much harkens back to this European tradition. Now, we have a photograph. And a photograph's creation is a little different from print's creation. And in order to get some kind of purchase on this, we have to think more broadly about the way that photographs were understood in China. And with that, I'm going to segue into my second section. Thinking about the shortcut to the essence of painting, early photography in China. Let's see. I'd like to start with an advertisement from a newspaper dated May 29th, 1876, from the photographer Si Tai or Liang Shitai, the same photographer that Dr. Zhang was talking about. I'm so happy that we were working so closely together on this. But this advertisement lays out the stakes of what photography, in his mind, could do. So I quote, the newly arrived photographer from Hong Kong, our studio was in Hong Kong for many years. Taught by Westerners, we mastered all the secrets of photography. Our studio produces exquisite and delicate pictures, including ones on stone, ivory, and silk. These photographs are also very lifelike, really a shortcut to capturing the essence of painting. So, 真诚丹青描摹之准法, 解法. So, these photographs are shortcuts to capturing the essence of painting. So what does that mean in practice? How can a photograph capture the essence of a painting? Well, here we have, again, Prince Yishan, Prince Chen, the same photographic enthusiast that Dr. Zhang was talking about. But here we have a self-portrait that carries with it not just a photographic quality, but is also, to an educated Chinese viewer, appealing to the painted tradition, a tradition of painting. Well, how do we know? This photograph bears the personal seals of the prince, and they're placed or burned in to the photograph itself and sit upon the top of the photograph just as seals sit atop a traditional Chinese portrait painting. Not only is the approach to composition similar to the way a painting worked, but also I would argue that this photograph is in dialogue with informal portraits of the court. Specifically, I think that images like this of the Qianlong Emperor might have inspired Prince Chen. Oh, you can't see the bottom right. This is unfortunate. This is Qianlong in a portrait by Giuseppe Castiglione, Lang Shining, showing the emperor gathering these lingzhi mushrooms. Also pictured with a deer. Also, you'll see with his personal seals on the top. In many ways, this painting is working in a manner that's not analogous exactly to photography, but in dialogue is what I would say. The photograph is talking to the painting tradition that came before. And it wasn't limited just to that informal photograph of the seventh prince. When we look at these later photographs of Cixi that were taken by Xunling, so this is slightly later than the proposed date of the photographs in the album, but nevertheless, they show an interest by Cixi in photography. I want to show how this photograph harkens to a similar tradition in the Chinese canon. This photograph by Xunling was sort of enlarged. This detail was blown up and colorized through the use of painting with the application of gold leaf, as well as a sort of photoshopping, a gentle photoshopping to Cixi's face to make her look a little younger. There was some little mascara applied. She looks real good. This painting, oh, the aspect has changed. That's unfortunate. It looks really great here. This painting photograph painting on the right was given as a diplomatic gift to Theodore Roosevelt, who was the sitting president at the time. So this is a photograph painting that is really straddling the two. You see, it has aspects of both, and not only does it literally straddle both media, it also, again, appeals to formal court portraits. Again, we have, just why not? I studied Qianlong, so you're going to see a lot of Qianlong. Here's another portrait, a formal portrait of Qianlong, shown in a very similar posture, a very similar position, fully frontal, fully symmetrical, again on a throne, again on this magnificent carpet. I believe, and I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say, that Cixi was thinking about these imperial projects of image making, of self-representing the Qing, self-representing the emperors, when she commissioned this, this photographic portrait, especially given the context in which it was used as a diplomatic gift. All right, we're getting close to the end here. I promise I won't take much of your time. 3 minutes? Oh gosh. All right, I might go a little longer than 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. Here is a painting by Catherine Augusta Karl, this portrait of the Empress Cixi. And this painting was created to be shipped out to the Universal Exposition in St. Louis in 1904. And if you notice what I've just done there, I said, this is a painting of blah, 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 blah. And our modern eyes just took me at my word. What you didn't see is this is a photograph of a painting. And I need you to uncumber your modern minds for a second, because we're so used to seeing pictures of things and treating them as the thing. But we have to remember that this idea is a modern one. It was not the case that photographs were taken of artwork even 100 years ago. This is a new invention. And thinking about the ways that the court used this tool of photographic reproduction will be interesting for us. Putting this into a Western context, this painting was photographed at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904, and here we see how the photograph places it into a geographical context, in the context of that exhibition, and this is a portrait exhibition there at the St. Louis World's Fair, and informs a viewer, informs a reader that this is where this portrait belongs. It belongs here, and you as a reader maybe didn't get to the fair, but you can still see it. And this is part of a larger tradition in the West of making photographic reproductions of fine works of art for people that couldn't get to places. So maybe you wanted to go on the grand tour, I promise, and but you couldn't go on the grand tour, but you could get a photograph of something from the grand tour. Photographs were marketed as a way to let somebody who couldn't go to a place have a piece of that place. It was a direct transcription of what you would see on the tour, and it was marketed and distributed as a way of linking your viewing to a specific place where you might not be able to go to. This, however, is different from, or first, I don't have time to talk about this. You can say that it's analogous, perhaps, to the way that early photographic reproductions of this were used. I don't have time to talk about that. This is from a book by Princess, in quotes, Derling, who used this image in a very similar way to the European model when promoting her book, really to show you that you can't go to the imperial court, but I'm an insider, and I took this photograph of this portrait that you can't see, and it was used as a marketing tool. But the interesting thing for us is the way that these photographs were used as a photographic reproduction of a place that you would never go, that was issued by an imperial authority, by the government, as an official act of representation. This is different. This is the crux of what I'm trying to argue here. This is a uniquely Chinese approach to using a photograph of an image, one that you don't find in the West, because unlike what's happening in newspapers, unlike what's happening in art materials, this was a gift from the Empress Dowager to you to allow you to see something in a place where, remember, you can't go. It's a bestowal of a privilege. It's the sign of favor. And photography is uniquely able to do that. So the crux of this paper, I have 3 tentative conclusions. Photographs contain the essence of paintings, which we've spoken about. Photographs are representations, not translations, meaning they're, I can talk more about this in the Q&A if you like, but they're not translated in the same way that a print is. They're directly taken from the thing that you are trying to reproduce. And third, they're intrinsically tied to space, meaning that this production of photographs of the interior of the Forbidden Court serves in China as a kind of gatekeeping and power and privilege. And for these reasons together, I think that these prints at Brown and these prints as part of a larger corpus of photographic reproductions of battle prints are pretty unique in this world of early photography. They're showing this new Western technology being used to express a distinctly Chinese approach to how the medium can be used in a new way that's unlike the way it was used anywhere else in the world. And that's it. Thank you. And I'd be remiss if you're interested in photography, you really need to see the exhibition at the Peabody Essex Museum, which is happening now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, but the second is, yeah.
Professor, yeah, he's on the screen. Okay. Thank you so much for that paper, and sorry to rush you through it. But I think what we're going to have 2 more papers on these very same photographic reproduction, so I think we'll have a lot of opportunity to to continue to unpack them. I think I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short. I think the thing that I really want to get at or start with is to me what is a sort of interesting conundrum that is suggested by putting the information in both these papers together. And it's a conundrum that pops out to me by the inclusion of commercial photographers and commercial artists, such as Wu Yoru, in the project, on the one hand, and then which in a longer sort of history of court painting may or may not be unusual, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts about this. But then also this question of this framework of allowing access to a place that you will never be. So how do we kind of reconcile these and reconcile them in the media world of 1880s and 1890s China? So to me, that's super interesting. And so maybe going back to the original remarks that Professor Perdue made this morning about Wei Yuan, how can we think of these, both the original paintings and the photographic reproductions, as a representation of people thinking in the same way they always have been, and then new ways about information systems that have come together, how they're able to, what are the systems by which they can reproduce the information of these battles, information of their power, the information of the relationships and networks based on who gets these albums and the reproductions and so on. And so I found the inclusion of Wu Yu as an artist in this particular subset of the paintings relating to the Huai army to be particularly intriguing, of course, because one of the things that he makes his name on, besides genre paintings and paintings of women in domestic settings, is the depiction of naval technology. Particularly, we tend to associate him with this depiction of naval technology from the coastal wars of empire, as appears in the Dianshizhai Huabao. And so the fact that he was commissioned for these paintings, which then he reproduced in the Dianshizhai, raises, I don't think it necessarily contradicts what is being said here, but it adds another level of instability and sort of multiple levels of reading and to the images that are under consideration. So I guess one question then is, what do you think that the role of commercial publication is in this? And we saw a little bit of discussion of the role of commercial photography, but we also have this new broader world of commercial publication overall. So if we sort of consider that more deeply as context, what does that bring to the table? One question also is why not, so we get a question of I think a really good explanation of why photographic reproduction and not other kinds of prints, but why not lithographic reproduction? Which is, of course, if Wu Yu is printing them in Dianshizhai, that's what we're doing. So we have a new kind of technology for the reproduction of complex images, or the representation, it's a better way of putting it, of complex images. So I think that's probably pretty easy to answer, but I just wanted to put that one on the table. So there is this sense of the competition, the market competition between photography and print is also, of course, extant in China at this time, with surrounding the question of lithography. I'm really interested also in the different layers within photography and how we should be considering, for example, tint in photography, tinted photographs, manipulated photographs. And is that a photographic painting, or is that something, since that was so common as as one of the repertoires of photographic technology and reproduction at the time, where does the realm of photographic technology end, and then the realm of bringing it into the world of painting begin? And that maybe that is based on the place that is adopting the technology. Maybe that's it looks different in China than it looks in other places. But I suppose that's a question I would want to raise. And of course, the other thing that I can't help but raise a question on is this question of the differing texts, the change in textual information, written textual information between the painting and the photographs, and what the significance of that is, as well as the framing and the titling, all these questions. Some of these may be explored later on in our next panel. Those are my main comments, though. Maybe, I don't know if we want to take some, because we are running late on time, if there are a couple of questions, maybe the best thing to do would be to take a couple of questions and then allow you to respond to these all together. If there are questions. Yes.
So my question's for Dan, and it's in thinking about the sort of technologies that anticipate photography. You use the term indexicality relatively loosely. I mean, I think in a classic Persian sense, the print would be, the engraving would be understood to exist in an iconic relationship to the painting, whereas the photograph would exist in an indexical relationship because it's linked to the cause. And so my question there is that there is, of course, another medium in which that same sort of causal relationship exists, and that's rubbings. Given the degree to which, for instance, the blue maps that we were looking at are also recalling a kind of visual rhetoric of the rubbing and the power invested in that and that status invested in that, the same sort of notion that this is an object that you might never get to see. It might not even exist any longer, but still nonetheless you have that sort of tactile connection to it through the rubbing. I wonder how you would situate that deeper history of a sort of media transmission in the narrative you're presenting.
This is Han. That's a great question, and actually I've argued in a different context that photography can be used in a manner akin to rubbing, and that's a really the camera's eye provides a kind of tactility that is sort of approximated by the rubbings. And I know you're deeply invested in rubbings. I bet if she could, she would have made rubbings of the paintings, but I don't think that was practical. But I think that photography offered a kind of presence that was distinct from the prints that came before, and offered a kind of improvement in access, or at least the conjuring of real geographic physical space, just because of the way that photographs were used more broadly in the West and also in China. Most photographs were taken of specific places, and they allowed you to feel like you were there, or gave you the illusion of that. So yeah, I think you're right on, and that would be a very productive way of finding a traditional Chinese theoretical ground to place this place photography in a dialogue with traditional arts. Thank you. Can I respond to your other thing?
Yes,
I don't know. I don't
absolutely.
want Professor Zhang. I don't want him to. Yes, you had raised a question about the line between painting and print. I don't know if you can share this. I don't know if I can share. I can't share. Oh, maybe I can share. Here we are, I'm sharing. So if this is I brought a detail so that you could see what was done to her eye. And so as opposed to a tint, you can actually see brushstrokes here used. So when I talk about this as a painted photograph, I'm actually following that, the catalog that was produced recently, Shutter and Brush on early photography in China. This is how they refer to it. You can see her eyebrow has the little brushstrokes, as well as the mascara I was talking about earlier. So that's a pretty straightforward question to answer. And lastly, the relationship between commercial publication and prints, if I can just take one more second. The kinds of things that were being commercially produced, that's a Western idea of China, what was being produced. But in China a little later, in the early 20th century, photography was being used in a way to promote China on the world stage, to bring distant landscapes to an international audience. But I see this as working in a way that's fundamentally different from the way that these imperial prints were used as a kind of regulation of access. Maybe similar but different. So this is from the World's Fair, and you can see in the upper left corner, those are images from they're photographic images of China, and there are records of what exactly was being presented at the exhibition. But that I see as being, that commercial approach is sort of similar to what we see in the West, but I argue, or I believe, is different from how the court was using these images. And that's all I'll say. I'd be happy to stop sharing the screen.
But then the third possible commercial approach is what's going on in the Chinese press, illustrated press.
Chinese illustrated press, yeah. I couldn't find, I mean, there's more to find. I couldn't find much while looking. I see it mostly on the Western stage, but there's more to do.
Yeah.
We have a question from online, from Ricarda Brosh. Both speakers suggest that these early court photographs of battle prints did not democratize access to and understanding of art in the way that object photography did in the West. This changes in the early 20th century, however, when photo studios such as Yang Guangxi did exactly that by photographing paintings in the imperial collection and distributing them through print. Can the speakers talk about this development?
I can, but I feel there are two of us. But I mean, yes, absolutely, you're completely correct. In an exhibition that I'm organizing at Hunter College next year, everyone should come. It opens during Asia Week. We talk about how the democratization of reproductions of paintings from the imperial collection, exactly as you bring up, allowed artists of a new generation access to images that they never would have seen, and that created all kinds of new artistic possibilities in China for painters that were engaging with the literati tradition. Yes, that's definitely a thing, but I see this as being earlier than that and as a distinct project from what would happen just a few years later. I hope that answers the question. Dr. Zhang?
Yeah, I just like to add, really agree with what you said, that it's to do with the institutionalization of, say, the art world, more public art world, like the museums and galleries, and in the early 20th century, in that context, we can look at this reproduction, photographic reproduction, and of artworks. But before 1900, as we both emphasize, it's a different case. Yeah, because the museum wasn't there, and while in Europe, if we compare, and it's completely different case. Yeah. And I'd like to respond to Rebecca's comments on the Wu Youru, particularly Wu Youru's involvement in this painting commission. And that actually was my my PhD topic, and I was really at the time I was interested in this, the artist from the commercial world, from this society versus the state in Beijing. He's from Suzhou, and he worked for Ernest Major, the owner of the 电视在画报, also the Shenbao, and was really the free space and politically and socially space in Shanghai in the concessions. And I was intrigued by his employment and in this. And my interpretation, in short, was that, and there was a tension, there was a competition between, it's an old story, in the 19th century social political history, between the regionalism and the centralism, and in Beijing. So Shanghai represents this provincial power, and represented by all levels of the power holders, including the Zheng Guoquan, and who was the governor of the Liangjiang, and the Beijing represented by the prince and the court and the Cixi. My theory, but I like to, in that thesis, my theory was that Wu Youru's study of the Taiping battle paintings was rejected by the court after submission. And because of his iconography wasn't acceptable, because he, in those studies of the 12 paintings, in two formats, one in National Paintings Museum, one in History Museum of China, and celebrate the Hunan Army's achievement. And also it has his own personal interpretation of war, which is not orderly organized and not just pacification, but it's a chaos, it's violence, and that's the reason why he's painting, and this is a fact, is not, say, enlarged according to original plan. The Prince Chen asked Li Hongzhang, asked Zheng Guoquan to produce these small-scale studies, and then Qingkuan's group to copy and to enlarge them. But in the end, the compositions between, we can observe, between Wu Youru's studies and the final paintings by Qingkuan, completely different.
Thank you. That is super interesting to hear. And to me also, I think the salutary aspect of these papers from the point of view of recent trends in late Qing history overall, which is to think about these the interest in developments in military technology, other scientific developments, that there is, as you say, there's this old narrative of sort of regionalism versus the center, but as the recent scholarship has shown, that there's much more back and forth between people who are developing these technologies than previously thought, and this is exactly what is being shown here, even if the outcome is still on decidedly on the side of glorification. It is a much more complex back and forth. So thank you very much for these rich papers, and I think we are at a time to break. Thank you very much.